Mary Worthington woke up in a maternity ward, believing her newborn was about to be brought back. The hearing test should have taken minutes, but when the nurse returned, she asked a simple question. Where is the baby who was supposed to be here? There had been no injection, no test, no record of her son ever leaving the room that morning. By the time the hospital understood what that meant, a one-day-old baby had already vanished. Today, I'll walk you through exactly how this happened. Tell me in the comments where you first heard about this case. It was a cold morning. A thin layer of fog still hung over the hospital parking lot, dulling the edges of the cars outside. Inside the maternity ward, nothing seemed out of place. The air carried the familiar scent of disinfectant. Rubber soles squeaked softly against tiled floors. From nearby rooms came the low, rhythmic cries of newborns settling into their first hours of life. The third floor held 8 rooms, each furnished with 2 beds. On the door of room 312, a small nameplate read Mary Worthington. Boy. Born November 6th. Mary Worthington was 26 years old and had given birth to her first child after 10 hours of labor. Her son, Philip, was just 1 day old. He weighed nearly 7 pounds and lay beside her, wrapped tightly in the standard Grandview Hospital newborn blanket. White, striped with pink and blue, identical to those used for every infant on the ward. Shortly after 10 a.m., Mary stirred awake following a routine blood pressure check by a nurse. She remembered that Philip was scheduled for a hearing test that morning. When the door opened again, she saw a middle-aged woman step inside. The woman wore a white medical coat, a face mask, and a name badge clipped neatly to her chest. Her voice was calm, practiced, and confident. "I need to take the baby for a quick check," she said. "It will only be a few minutes." Mary did not hesitate. In that ward, everyone dressed the same. The uniforms blended together, and nothing about the woman felt unusual. Mary nodded. The woman lifted baby Philip gently from the crib, cradled him close to her chest, and walked out of the room. The door shut behind her with a soft click. So quiet, Mary barely registered it. She closed her eyes again, convinced her baby was in safe hands. 15 minutes later, a different nurse entered room 312 to change Philip's diaper. The crib was empty. At first, she assumed the baby was still in the testing area, but when she checked the ward records, something was wrong. No nurse had been assigned to take Philip Worthington anywhere that morning. The room fell silent. Within seconds, the head nurse activated the hospital's internal emergency system. A code pink alert was issued, the first newborn abduction alert in Grandview Hospital's history. The response was immediate. Doors were locked. Security sealed off exits. Staff members were ordered to stop where they stood and submit to checks. But the realization came too late. A service door on the south side of the building, normally used for deliveries, had been left unguarded. Later, a janitor would report seeing a woman in a white uniform around 10:40 a.m. She was carrying what looked like a baby wrapped in blankets, heading toward the parking lot. At the time, he had not questioned it. Nurses carried babies through the halls every day. By 11:10 a.m., Sellersville police arrived. The hospital descended into chaos. Officers searched every floor, every restroom, every storage area. There were no signs of forced entry, no indication of a struggle. The only physical trace left behind was a neatly folded hospital blanket on the bed. Clean, unstained, without blood, hair, or any forensic clue. Local police immediately contacted the Pennsylvania State Police and the FBI. A missing newborn inside a hospital, with the possibility of interstate movement, constituted a federal crime. At 11:30 a.m., the first radio bulletin went out. A one-day-old infant has been reported missing from Grandview Hospital in Sellersville. Authorities believe the baby was taken by a woman posing as a nurse. News spread rapidly. Reporters gathered outside the hospital, questioning its security measures. Cameras captured nurses signing reports with shaking hands and new mothers clutching their babies tighter than before. Mary Worthington, still in shock, was moved to a private room. A hospital psychologist noted in her file patient repeatedly asks where her baby is. States she saw a nurse take him for a hearing test. Within 3 hours, a temporary command post was established in the third-floor hallway. FBI agents, state troopers, and local officers worked side by side. They interviewed 37 hospital staff members, 4 patients, and 2 security guards. Visitor logs were reviewed line by line. No one could recall the woman's face clearly. A trainee nurse vaguely remembered seeing someone unfamiliar. Brown hair, long sleeves. Not like our usual uniforms. Security staff reviewed the CCTV footage. The system relied on old magnetic tapes, grainy and low in quality. One blurred frame showed a woman exiting the side door at 10:42 a.m., holding something white close to her body. The exterior camera was malfunctioning. No vehicle, no license plate. That afternoon, police released a suspect description: white female, approximately 40 to 50 years old. Height between 5 feet 4 inches and 5 feet 6 inches. Medium build. Brown hair. Wearing a white medical uniform. By 6 p.m., local television stations were broadcasting live from outside the hospital. Headlines scrolled across screens: baby boy, 1 day old, abducted from hospital. Throughout the night, search efforts spread outward. Hospitals within a 100-mile radius were alerted. Gas stations, motels, and bus terminals were checked. Emergency bulletins reached across Pennsylvania, Maryland, and New Jersey. No confirmed sightings were reported. The baby's parents remained under police protection. When investigators asked Mary to describe what she remembered, she could only whisper one sentence. She said she was the nurse. That line was entered into FBI case file 86-1-1-07-FBI1, officially marking the beginning of the Worthington abduction investigation. By midnight, Grandview Hospital remained fully illuminated. Nurses continued their shifts in heavy silence. A hastily printed poster appeared in the hallway: missing newborn, Phillip Worthington, born November 6, 1986. The photo showed a single Polaroid taken earlier that morning. Outside, fog still clung to the ground. Inside, the empty crib in room 312 stood as a symbol of the community's worst fear. The moment innocence disappeared from Grandview Hospital. That night, the FBI formally assumed control of the investigation. A specialized unit was dispatched immediately: the Infant Abduction Response Team, a group trained specifically to handle newborn kidnappings from hospitals, dressed in dark suits, their badges catching the glare of fluorescent hallway lights. They moved quietly through the maternity ward, past nurses and staff still shaken by what had happened. Their first task was systematic reconstruct the hospital's security from the ground up. Entry points, exit routes, shift schedules, gate logs. Every procedure was reviewed line by line. None of it explained how the woman Mary Worthington described could have passed through unnoticed. That same afternoon, investigators began a second round of interviews. 37 hospital employees, 4 patients, and 2 security guards were questioned again. The accounts did not align. One staff member claimed she had seen a strange nurse walking fast down the hall. Another insisted the woman must have come from the pediatrics wing. A trainee nurse remembered a middle-aged woman with brown hair holding a clipboard roughly 10 minutes before the alarm was triggered. She had not paid attention to the name badge, assuming it belonged to someone from an earlier shift. Grandview Hospital's security team handed over the CCTV recordings. The footage was old, black and white, magnetic tape, grainy and inconsistent. One segment showed only the vague outline of a woman, estimated to be in her 40s or 50s, wearing a white medical coat and holding something small close to her chest. She exited through the south service door at 10:42 a.m. The camera angle was low, the image washed out by overexposed light. Outside, the vehicle camera failed entirely. No license plate could be identified. Police then turned their attention to the parking areas. More than 70 vehicles were logged on the hospital grounds that morning. 15 of them belonging to staff on duty. None matched reports of a gray or silver mid-sized sedan. The search widened to the public lot across the street, which had no surveillance cameras. Only handwritten parking tickets. No names stood out. Ramona Thompson did not appear anywhere in the records. By 3 p.m., a statewide alert was issued through the Pennsylvania State Police Network. There was no Amber Alert system at the time, so the warning was distributed the old way, by fax, telephone, and radio to police departments across the state. The suspect description was concise: female, Caucasian, mid-40s, brown hair, wearing hospital uniform, possibly driving gray sedan, infant, male, 1 day old, abducted from Sellersville Hospital. Gas stations, motels, and nearby hospitals were instructed to watch for any woman arriving with a newborn and no birth documentation. Within the first 24 hours, more than 200 tips poured in. A woman seen holding a baby at a rest stop in Reston. A couple with an unexplained infant at a roadside motel. Each lead was pursued. Everyone was eliminated. Nothing held. Inside Grandview Hospital, tension deepened as the hours passed. News crews camped outside the main entrance. Police erected barricades to keep cameras from pointing toward maternity windows. New mothers were transferred to a different wing to escape the media frenzy. A doctor working the night shift later recalled, "No one took their eyes off their babies. Everyone started doubting each other." The Worthington family was relocated to a private room away from the ward. Mary lay exhausted in bed, whispering the same question again and again. Have they found him yet? Her husband, Thomas Worthington, tried to remain composed as reporters pressed around him. He spoke only once. Quietly, "We just want our baby back alive." Police advised him to stop there. Any public statement could provoke a desperate response from the kidnapper. The hospital lockdown remained in effect throughout the night. Security teams inspected every trash bag, every supply cart, even the air vents. Forensic technicians dusted room 312 for fingerprints. The results were unsettling in their absence, only Mary's prints and those of hospital staff. No foreign DNA, no stray hairs, no footprints in the corridor. The room was clean. Too clean. By the morning of November 8th, the FBI escalated the case to a federal interstate kidnapping investigation. Special Agent John R. Handley from the Philadelphia field office was assigned as lead. One of his first orders was a comprehensive review of all reports involving women impersonating nurses within a 300-mile radius of Sellersville over the previous 3 months. 14 incidents surfaced, mostly petty thefts. None involved newborns. One record, however, drew attention: a woman in Maryland, Ramona J. Thompson. In 1984, she had been warned for impersonating medical staff at a private clinic. It was not enough to justify an arrest, but it was enough to redirect the investigation. New maps were pinned over old ones. Red arrows traced Interstate 476, stretching south from Pennsylvania into Maryland. Temporary road checkpoints were authorized. Local police departments were instructed to watch for a gray sedan carrying a middle-aged woman and a baby. At the same time, Grandview Hospital faced its first major public reckoning. The hospital director held a brief press conference, apologizing to the Worthington family and pledging a full internal security review. The statement did little to quiet the scrutiny. The Philadelphia Inquirer ran a headline that cut straight to the fear gripping the public. How can a baby vanish from a mother's arms inside a hospital? 2 days after the abduction, there was still nothing. No ransom note, no phone call, no message of any kind. There was no demand, no attempt to negotiate. Nothing that pointed to money as a motive. So why take the child, investigators kept asking. The answer, they would soon realize, had nothing to do with greed. It was rooted in a woman's fractured desire to be a mother, a longing that had been breaking and reshaping itself for years before it finally turned dark. By then, the faint smell of cold coffee still clung to the third-floor hallway at Grandview Hospital. But the investigators were already gone. They left behind only fragments, a grainy CCTV image, the description of a middle-aged woman dressed in white, and the vague outline of a gray sedan that had likely dissolved into late-morning traffic. The trail no longer ran through hospital corridors. It stretched outward, across federal highway maps, toll records, and traffic cameras scattered throughout the Northeast. The FBI requested footage from every junction surrounding Sellersville between 10:30 a.m. and 11:30 a.m. Bridge cameras, toll booths, even the aging security tape from the public parking lot across from the hospital. On one static-heavy frame, a technician paused the playback. A gray Oldsmobile Cutlass rolled through the frame. Time-stamped 10:49 a.m. The curve of the trunk, the shape of the taillights. Details subtle enough to miss unless you knew where to look. A veteran agent leaned in and nodded. Mid-1980s, Cutlass, he said quietly. It was not proof, but it was a direction. From there, the focus shifted to vehicle records. Pennsylvania's DMV yielded nothing useful when cross-checked against the hospital parking logs. The search expanded southward, toward Maryland. The most plausible route, if the suspect had merged onto the interstate shortly after leaving the hospital. Filters were applied: vehicle model, color, registered owner's age. The list was long at first, then steadily narrowed. One name appeared twice across overlapping databases. Ramona Joan Thompson, 45 years old, Ellicott City, Maryland. Her DMV file showed an unsteady signature and an outdated photo ID. She owned a gray Oldsmobile Cutlass. Registration valid. Inspection current. Investigators isolated the name and began peeling back the layers of her life. Civil court filings, divorce records, short-term employment, fragments of medical history. A pattern emerged, muted but unmistakable. Ramona was divorced, with 4 adult children. She had once worked as a medical office clerk. She was familiar with hospital routines, staff badges, white coats, and clinical language. Then, one line from a medical record dated 1978 froze the room. Total hysterectomy due to complications. From that moment forward, Ramona Thompson could no longer have children. Yet in recent months, neighbors in Ellicott City had told local police a different story. They said Ramona was expecting, that her baby was due in early November, that she had painted a nursery blue. The timeline of her supposed pregnancy aligned almost perfectly with the birth of baby Phillip Worthington. What had once been a faint, uncomfortable theory solidified into the main line of investigation. That afternoon, agents canvassed Ramona's quiet cul-de-sac. Neighbors described her as polite but withdrawn, increasingly preoccupied with talking about the baby. Several mentioned a man who visited frequently, mid-40s, driving a dark blue pickup truck. Phone records identified him as George Sustek, 42, an electrical engineer with a steady job and no criminal history. For investigators, the critical question was not who Sustek was. It was what he believed. They asked him to come in for a few clarifications. Sustek arrived wearing a checked shirt, collar buttoned, with the confused expression of someone caught in a situation he did not fully understand. During questioning, his voice remained calm but uncertain. He said he believed Ramona was pregnant. They had picked out a name. A crib was set up in a small room painted blue. He spoke about driving her to prenatal appointments at a private clinic. He described ultrasound photos, stamped medical forms, appointment slips. She said early November. He murmured, "I took vacation to be ready." When an agent gently asked whether he had ever actually seen Ramona's pregnant belly, Sustek hesitated. He said she had gained weight, that she wore loose clothing, that he respected her privacy. The agents exchanged brief glances. His answers fit the profile not of an accomplice, but of someone who had been deceived. Forensic document specialists were then asked to examine the maternity paperwork Ramona had presented. Under magnification, inconsistencies emerged. Stamp impressions were uneven. Spelling errors appeared where none should have existed. Typewriter fonts did not match across pages. One supposed ultrasound image showed visual noise patterns inconsistent with equipment used in the region. Appointment cards carried dates that were almost too carefully arranged. At that point, the theory no longer relied on instinct. The pregnancy had been fabricated. Meanwhile, a surveillance team rotated shifts outside Ramona Thompson's house, watching from an unmarked sedan parked down the block. Every movement was logged. During the day, she rarely went out. At night, the light in a back room flickered on and off. There were no sounds of a baby crying, no stroller by the door, no diaper trash, no empty formula containers. The absence of those ordinary signs spoke louder than any confession ever could. Back at the command center, the wall map began to change. Red pins multiplied, forming a single thread that connected Sellersville to Ellicott City. Tracing the presumed route of the gray Cutlass after 10:42 a.m., investigators contacted gas stations along I-95 and I-83, asking clerks to pull receipts for purchases made between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. on November 7th newborn formula. Diapers, baby bottles. A few transactions matched the spending pattern of a new mother, but the surveillance cameras were too grainy to confirm who made them. Each lead felt close enough to touch, before slipping away. Still, the picture was tightening. A woman surgically unable to bear children since 1978, claiming a due date in early November 1986, owning a vehicle that matched witness descriptions, maintaining a devoted partner, expecting a baby boy, carrying forged medical documents, possessing just enough medical office experience to move through a hospital without raising suspicion. Any one of those facts might have been coincidence. Together, they formed a single, chilling motive to steal a child and turn a lie into something tangible, to hold living proof of motherhood, for herself and for the man she was terrified of losing. As agents drafted the interim report, one question cut through the room like a scalpel. Where is the baby? If the so-called replacement mother theory was correct, then Phillip Worthington was likely still alive. In Ramona's delusion, he was not expendable. He was the center of the story. That possibility carried hope, but it also carried urgency. Every passing hour increased the risk to a newborn without proper medical oversight. Surveillance was tightened further. Agents tracked every errand Ramona ran, every pharmacy she entered, every receipt from every store. Any mistake, a sudden cry, a milk stain, a single baby item visible in her car, could force immediate action. That night, a fine drizzle tapped softly against the hoods of the surveillance vehicles. At headquarters, the lights stayed on. On a desk beside a cooling cup of coffee lay an open file. Centered on the page was the name Ramona Joan Thompson. Beneath it, one short line from her medical history was underlined: total hysterectomy, 1978. That phrase revealed more than any witness ever had. It pointed to the hollow space that had existed inside her for nearly a decade. A void powerful enough to pull this case out of the quiet halls of a Pennsylvania hospital and onto the vast network of interstates, where a desperate illusion was racing to become reality at any cost. Then the FBI hotline rang. The Baltimore office was quiet, lit only by a yellow desk lamp and the low hum of the air conditioner. The operator answered, pressed the record button, and waited. A woman's voice came through. Soft, controlled, as if each word was being measured against something holding her back. She identified herself as Florence Fowler. After a shaky breath, she said one sentence that brought the room to a standstill. My mother is keeping a baby that is not hers. The operator signaled to the duty agent. Within 30 seconds, the call was routed to the FBI's remote interrogation line. Florence spoke quickly, but her account was precise, the kind of structure that usually accompanies truth. Weeks earlier, her mother Ramona had given her $2,000 and asked her to fly to Texas to arrange an adoption through a private channel that was already set. The plan collapsed. The money disappeared. Ramona vanished for several days. Then, earlier that week, she returned, with a newborn baby in her arms. Ramona claimed she had given birth at a private clinic and warned everyone not to ask questions until the papers were ready. Florence had not believed her, but she had no proof. Until that evening, when local news broadcast the face of a missing baby. The blanket, the age, the timing, everything matched Phillip Worthington. Florence said she could no longer stay silent. The agent asked short, steady questions. Where is Ramona now? Is the baby alive? Is anyone else in the house? Florence gave the address in Ellicott City, the last house on the row, with a rear door opening toward a liquor store parking lot. She said the baby was unusually quiet, rarely crying. Ramona carried a brand new diaper bag in and out of the house. George Soustek visited occasionally, but never held the infant. He seemed confused, nervous, as though afraid to ask the wrong question. I'm sure it's the baby from the news, Florence repeated. Before ending the call, she agreed to verify her identity and allow the line to be traced. The signal locked within seconds, pinpointing Ellicott City, the same neighborhood already under quiet FBI surveillance. Within 10 minutes, the command center came alive. 2 unmarked vehicles took positions at either end of Ramona's street. Another team borrowed the vantage point of a neighbor's balcony across the way. Long lenses were adjusted, night binoculars raised, radios stayed muted, broken only by clipped status updates. Target inside, backroom light on, no infant sounds. Time stretched thin. If Ramona believed the child was hers, she would be careful, feeding him, keeping him warm, preventing cries. That meant the baby was likely alive. It also meant silence. Just after midnight, the lights inside the house went dark. A shadow crossed the rear window and paused, possibly near a crib. Nothing followed. Orders were clear, observe only. Until a federal arrest warrant was issued. The night dragged on. Rain beaded across windshields, amplifying every small noise. The agents watched the modest house as if it were a doorway in time, knowing that one wrong move could fracture everything they were trying to save. 6 a.m., November 13th. The front door opened. Ramona stepped outside. A heavy coat pulled tight around her shoulders. In her arms, she carried a baby wrapped in a pink and blue striped hospital blanket. The pattern already burned into every investigator's memory. She paused, glanced left, then right, and walked toward her gray sedan parked at the curb. Over the radio, a voice cut in quietly but unmistakably. Target holding infant. Blanket matches. Likely victim. The command center relayed the confirmation to the federal prosecutor on duty. Within moments, an emergency arrest order was approved, coordinated with Howard County Police to cover jurisdiction. Ramona placed the baby carefully into the back seat, adjusted her rearview mirror, and started the engine. She pulled away from the curb and headed toward a Liquor World store, the same location Florence Fowler had mentioned. The tail vehicles followed at a controlled distance. The gap between them was deliberate. Space mattered now. Then the final directive came through. Priority is infant safety. Soft stop. No high-speed pursuit. At 7:15 a.m., Ramona turned into the liquor store parking lot. The 2 unmarked vehicles closed in, one blocking the front, the other sealing the rear. Their lights flashed a moment late. Intentionally, to avoid panic, 3 agents approached from the driver's side. A 4th covered the rear passenger door. The driver's door opened slowly. Ramona turned toward them, clutching the baby tightly against her chest. Her lips moved, whispering a stream of broken words, more prayer than sentence. A female agent spoke first. Her voice was steady, controlled. Mrs. Ramona Thompson, we have a federal warrant for your arrest. Please stay calm. Your baby will be safe. Every movement that followed was deliberate. One agent extended his arms. Another secured Ramona's wrists. The transfer of the child happened in a single, smooth motion, rehearsed countless times in training, rarely executed in real life. The baby, Phillip Worthington, breathed softly. His cheeks were warm and flushed. The hospital ID bracelet was still fastened around his wrist. A paramedic checked his vitals immediately. Pulse, breathing, reflexes. Stable, he said. The tension released all at once. Inside the vehicle, evidence lay scattered like pieces finally snapping into place: a white medical coat, a clipboard, unopened formula, fresh diapers, forged ultrasound documents. In the glove compartment, a handwritten note read George. "Our baby is here." The ink pressed deeply into the paper, a trembling attempt to make the lie feel real. Ramona did not resist as she was led away. She kept repeating the same words, barely above a whisper. "Don't take my baby." That sentence would later be transcribed into the arrest report. In its simplicity, it captured everything. The desperation to turn fantasy into fact, to rewrite biology through deception. But on that cold morning, only one truth mattered. The baby was alive. He was safe. And the illusion stretching from a maternity ward in Sellersville to a liquor store parking lot in Maryland had finally collapsed. A coded message was sent back to Grandview Hospital. Recovered alive. In Sellersville, a soft knock on a hospital room door startled Mary Worthington awake. She sat upright instantly. What followed would unfold under strict protocol. Medical confirmation, identity verification, press containment. But everything began with that single message, made possible by one phone call. A daughter stepping outside blood loyalty to become the decisive witness. It was the moment the illusion shattered. The case closed not with chaos, but with precision. Clinical. Quiet. Exact. 7:15 a.m. November 13th, 1986. Ellicott City, Maryland. Morning fog still clung low to the ground. Yellow light from the Liquor World parking lot reflected off wet asphalt as FBI agents and Howard County officers moved in from both sides. No one spoke. Radios stayed silent. Breaths were held. When the gray Oldsmobile Cutlass came to a stop, the plan unfolded without deviation. One vehicle blocked the front. Another sealed the rear. A calm female voice broke the stillness. "Mrs. Thompson, please stay calm." Ramona Joan Thompson did not fight. She did not run or scream. She held the baby close and whispered again and again, "Don't take my baby." As the handcuffs clicked shut, the words continued. Half prayer, half trance. In the back seat, baby Phillip Worthington lay wrapped in Grandview Hospital's striped blanket. The plastic ID band still reading Worthington. Boy. Two female agents lifted him carefully, their movements slow and exact, as though one mistake could undo everything. A medical officer checked him again, fingers curled, skin warm, hydrated, strong pulse. "He's stable," the doctor confirmed. The entire team exhaled. The release of 4 days without sleep. An FBI ambulance arrived within minutes. Phillip was transported to Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore for a full pediatric evaluation. The doors closed between two silent lines of officers. A photographer across the lot captured the moment. The image would later appear on front pages nationwide beneath the headline, "Stolen Newborn, Found Alive in Maryland." Midday. The story dominated the airwaves. Morning programs interrupted regular broadcasts. Baby Phillip found safe. Suspect arrested. In Sellersville, a town that had lived 4 days in suspended dread, people wept openly. The police chief's statement was brief: "The child is safe. That's all that matters." Meanwhile, agents secured Ramona's home in Ellicott City. Inside, they found a newly assembled crib with blue bedding, unopened formula bottles, and another handwritten note on the kitchen table. "George, our baby is here." The letters were smudged, pressed deep, written by a hand trying desperately to believe its own story. Her bag was logged into evidence, a fake hospital name tag, a white lab coat, a clipboard, forged ultrasound documents typed on mismatched machines, unopened baby bottles. These items would later be entered into the federal case U.S. versus Ramona J. Thompson, 1987, at Johns Hopkins. doctors completed a full examination of baby Phillip temperature, blood work, hydration, nutrition, reflexes. There were no injuries, no bruises, no signs of neglect. The child had been fed, bathed, kept warm, almost lovingly, just by the wrong woman. That afternoon, the FBI contacted the Worthington family. 2 agents handled the call, aware that every word carried weight. When the father, Thomas Worthington, heard the sentence, "We found him. He's alive," he went silent. After a long pause, he whispered only 2 words, "Thank God." By nightfall, the family was escorted back to Pennsylvania under federal protection. At Grandview Hospital, nurses gathered near the entrance, many openly crying as the infant was returned to his mother's arms. One nurse later told a local station, "It feels like the hospital can finally breathe again." In Baltimore, Ramona Thompson was transferred to a federal detention facility. During her medical intake, she asked just one question: "The baby, is he okay?" No one responded. The question was recorded in her intake file anyway, a quiet note that captured the thin, tragic line between criminal act and distorted affection. That evening, television networks across the country replayed the rescue footage on a loop. Police lights flashing across wet asphalt became the image of a rare, almost unbelievable ending. Under the headline, "Stolen Newborn Found Alive in Maryland," letters and flowers flooded into Grandview Hospital from all over the nation. Women's advocacy groups began public discussions about false pregnancy syndromes and the urgent need for stronger maternity ward security. Within a week, more than 30,000 letters arrived at the Worthington home. Most were from strangers who wrote only to say they had cried when they heard the news. One newspaper summarized the moment simply: "It wasn't just a baby that was found. It was a town's faith in safety." The case closed with uncommon clarity and restraint. A child returned unharmed. A woman pulled out of delusion, and a nation reminded that motherhood, real or imagined, can be both the gentlest and the most terrifying force in crime. At FBI headquarters in Baltimore, Ramona Joan Thompson sat alone in a small interrogation room. Fluorescent light washed over her pale face. For several minutes, she said nothing, hands folded tightly, eyes fixed on the blank wall ahead. When questioning began, her voice emerged softly, suspended between coherence and trance. "I just wanted to keep the man I love," she said. "I promised him." Ramona denied nothing. She described everything in detail: the original idea of adopting a newborn, purchasing a nurse's uniform, forging a name badge, packing diapers, milk, and blankets into the trunk of her car. Each step was recited calmly, methodically, like items on a checklist. When asked why she chose Grandview Hospital, she answered plainly that she had read in the papers it was easy to enter. With no employee ID checks, the investigator noted her repeated use of the phrase, "our baby," rather than "the baby," a linguistic marker often associated with identity delusion. When imagined reality replaces the real one, a subsequent psychiatric evaluation concluded that Ramona suffered from pseudochisis, or false pregnancy, a condition frequently observed in women who have lost the ability to bear children but remain psychologically consumed by motherhood. Her medical history confirmed a total hysterectomy in 1978, following severe pregnancy complications that rendered her infertile. The psychiatrist described the combination of that trauma, a later divorce, and prolonged emotional instability as fertile ground for delusion to develop. Ramona believed she could begin again with George Sustek, the man she loved. When he expressed his desire for a son, she convinced herself that as long as a baby existed in her arms, the rest would fall into place. That belief, fragile yet overwhelming, was later cited in court as the sole motive behind the crime. Federal prosecutor William McDowell charged Ramona under Title 18, United States Code, Section 12-01, interstate kidnapping. The statute carried a possible life sentence. However, because she pleaded guilty early and cooperated fully, The case proceeded under summary trial, without a jury. During preliminary court proceedings in February 1987, Ramona maintained her confession. She acted alone. There was no accomplice. She never intended to harm the baby. When the judge asked why she had not pursued legal adoption, she answered quietly, "I didn't want a child. I wanted his child." The courtroom fell silent. It was neither defense nor logic. Only the echo of a mind detached from reality. On May 27, 1987, at the Federal District Court of Maryland, Judge Howard Van Pelt delivered the sentence. His words were measured. Deliberate, this crime is sad and pathetic rather than vicious. It is a tragedy of delusion, not of malice. Sentence: 18 years in federal prison at FCI Danbury, with mandatory psychiatric treatment throughout incarceration. Ramona lowered her head. She did not cry. She did not react. Azu, Saf. Marshals led her away. She asked one final question, barely audible. "Does George know I did it for him?" No one answered. George Sustek was later questioned extensively. He stated he had no knowledge of the plan and genuinely believed Ramona was pregnant. Investigators verified his account. No evidence connected him to the crime, and he was never charged, though his name remained forever linked to the case as the unwitting trigger of a dangerous illusion. Florence Fowler, Ramona's eldest daughter, the one who had contacted the FBI, received $40,000 from the Federal Crime Assistance Fund. The press labeled her the daughter forced to choose between justice and blood. In her only public comment, Florence said, "I did what anyone should do, but there's no joy in having your own mother arrested." Though the case itself lasted only 6 months, its impact reached far beyond the courtroom. Media reactions split sharply. The New York Times asked, "A mother's lie or a mind's collapse?" The Washington Post called it the anatomy of maternal delusion. Psychologists debated whether Ramona was best understood as a criminal or a patient, and whether empathy had a place in a crime driven not by hatred or profit, but by the desperate need to occupy a role lost long ago. For the FBI, the Worthington kidnapping became a reference case in training programs dealing with psychological motive, impersonation, and hospital security breaches. In the final report, one line was underlined in red: "Early intervention saves lives." And sometimes, sanity. After the May 1987 verdict, the kidnapping of baby Phillip Worthington was officially closed on paper, but the echo of it lingered for years. The Worthington family, exhausted by weeks of relentless media attention, disappeared from public view. They left Sellersville without providing a forwarding address and declined every request for interviews. When a Philadelphia Inquirer reporter returned to the neighborhood in 1988, a neighbor offered only a brief explanation: "They don't want to talk about it anymore." In FBI records, Philip's final notation was simple: healthy, developing normally. The child grew up, but for his parents, the scar remained. The memory that, for 6 days, the world had taken their baby and held him somewhere beyond reach. At Grandview Hospital, the abduction became the defining shock in its history. The board ordered a full overhaul of security procedures. Every staff member was issued an electronic ID card, required to scan through secured gates. New hallway cameras were installed. The rooming-in policy, keeping mothers and infants together around the clock, became mandatory. Medical staff were retrained to identify impersonators, to challenge anyone without proper identification, and to accept a hard truth inside a hospital: trust can never replace verification. From that point on, Grandview became one of Pennsylvania's early leaders in newborn security. The state health department followed soon after. In September 1987, new maternity ward security guidelines were issued statewide. Using the Worthington case as a central teaching example, training sessions opened with a single warning line: if it happened once, it can happen again. It was more than policy. It was a reminder of the cost of complacency. Florence Fowler, the daughter whose phone call shattered her mother's illusion, lived quietly afterward. When NBC attempted to include her in its 1990 documentary Stolen Infants, Florence declined. She never sought attention for what she had done. By the early 2000s, the FBI formally classified the Ramona Thompson Worthington kidnapping as a foundational case study in maternal abduction driven by psychological motive. 3 decades later, the case was no longer headline news, but it endured as a mirror reflecting the fragile boundary between the instinct to nurture and the hunger to be loved. Somewhere between those two forces, Ramona Thompson lost her way, and through her story, America learned that not all crimes are born from cruelty. Some grow quietly out of a void left unfilled for far too long. After finishing this case, what stayed with me was not the image of flashing police lights or the courtroom verdict. It was something quieter, something harder to place. For days, I kept thinking about how ordinary everything looked before it broke. A hospital hallway, a white coat, a mother trusting the system because she had no reason not to. We like to believe danger announces itself, that it looks wrong, sounds wrong. But here, it didn't. It blended in. It spoke calmly. It wore a badge. What unsettles me most is not just that a baby was taken, but how easily trust became the doorway. There's a temptation, after knowing the ending, to flatten this story into a simple moral villain and victim, crime and punishment. But that feels dishonest, because when I look at Ramona Thompson, I don't see a monster in the traditional sense. I see a void, one that was never treated, never confronted, and eventually filled itself in the most destructive way possible. That doesn't excuse what she did. Nothing does. But it complicates it. And real life is almost always complicated. What also stays with me is the silence of those 6 days. No ransom call. No message. No demand. Just absence. That kind of silence forces everyone, investigators, parents, even the public, to project their own fears into the gap. And once suspicion starts to spread, it doesn't move logically. It moves emotionally. I think about Mary Worthington, lying in a hospital bed meant for recovery. Instead, trapped inside a question with no answer. Did I do something wrong by trusting? That kind of question doesn't disappear just because your child comes home. And I think about Florence Fowler, the daughter who made the call. People call her brave, and she was, but bravery doesn't cancel grief. Choosing justice over blood is not heroic in a cinematic way. It's lonely. It fractures something forever. If there's a lesson here, it isn't just about hospital security or ID badges, though those matter. It's about how untreated longing can quietly rot into delusion, how systems built on trust still need verification, and how sometimes the most dangerous crimes aren't driven by hate or greed, but by a desperate need to belong, to be loved, to not be left behind. This case ended with a rare outcome. A child returned alive. But the damage didn't vanish with him. It simply became invisible. And maybe that's the part that stays with me the longest. The reminder that even when a story ends well, not everyone walks away whole. If you stayed with this story until the end, thank you. And I'd genuinely like to know which moment stayed with you the most.